What's the most extreme measure you took to make your controlling parents back off? I was 8 years old the first time I had to balance a hardcover encyclopedia on my head while carrying a tray of water across the room. I made it 3 steps before the book slid off my head and I lunged to catch it. Water sloshed everywhere. Again, Mom said, her voice flat. My legs were shaking by the 4th attempt. Mom, my arms hurt. Again. My older sister stood by the wall, her eyes down, not looking at me. She'd already passed. By the time I turned 11, the bedtime routine was carved into my brain. Every night, Elena and I would stand side by side in front of the bathroom mirror, reciting the phrases, "Whatever you think is best, honey." I'm sorry for speaking out of turn. When Elena turned 14, she brought home a boy named Humus. Humus was polite, held doors open, asked Elena about her day. Mom didn't say a word through dinner, just smiled. But the second Humus left, she grabbed Elena by the hair and dragged her to the kitchen. "You think you're smart? You think you can embarrass me like that?" I ran to my room and put my pillow over my head. The next morning, Elena had bruises on her arms and I never saw Humus again. 2 weeks later, she was dating Derek. And Derek told her what to wear. He checked her phone. Every morning before school, she'd iron his shirts, pack his lunches with notes like, "I exist to make you happy." Mom bought her a $300 KitchenAid mixer. "For being such a wonderful partner," she said, beaming. I tried to earn approval differently. Studied until my eyes burned. The day my Northwestern acceptance letter arrived, I ran home from the bus stop. "Mom!" I got in. Full ride. "Congrats, honey," she said, her voice dismissive. "But I really wish you'd put this much effort into finding a nice boy to take care of." Before I could respond, she grabbed it and threw it down the garbage disposal. "Mom, that's Northwestern." "I know what it is, sweetie." She went back to measuring flour. "But you're 18 now. You should be thinking about your future. Your husband." A week later, Elena came home with a black eye, poorly covered with concealer. When I tried to talk to her about it, she actually laughed. "Oh, this? Derek just gets a little carried away sometimes. It's actually really sweet. It means he can't control himself around me because he loves me so much." I knew I'd already lost her. The next morning, Mom was at the kitchen table crying. "I'm a failure," she said when she saw me. "I'm the only one who will ever truly love you, and you hate me for it." I stood in the doorway, frozen. I actually believed I was the worst daughter to ever exist. That summer, I met my boyfriend Tyrone. He'd check my phone, told me my friends were bad influences, made me share my location 24/7. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. But when I brought him home for Independence Day, my mom's face lit up. And for the first time in 3 years, she pulled me into a hug. It felt like hugging a stranger wearing my mother's skin. 4 years went by. I took a class on women's rights in college. I went to therapy. Left Tyrone over text. That's when I met James. He was the oldest brother to 3 younger sisters. He asked what I wanted on dates and planted my favorite flowers just so he could handpick them. The first time I mentioned him to Mom on the phone, her voice went cold. "What does he do?" "He's a lawyer. Specializes in domestic abuse." Silence. Then, "If you bring that man to my house, Mia, so help me." "Mom, boys like that destroyed your cousin's life. They smile and nod and make you feel equal until you're 40 and alone because he never committed." Her voice was shaking. "Do not bring him here." When Christmas came and Mom invited me for dinner, I knew exactly what I was doing when I said yes. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when Elena opened the door. Bruises poorly covered with Dollar Tree concealer, walking with a limp. "MIA," she said, her voice too bright. James just smiled, polite and warm. Mom appeared in the hallway. Her face went red when she saw him. Her eyes dropped to my engagement ring. "Look what you've become." Before I could respond, she was screaming, "You've destroyed everything I taught you," and grabbed my left hand. I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron. She started twisting the ring. Elena's arms locked around my chest, pinning me in place. "Elena, let go. I'm helping you," Elena whispered in my ear. "Mom knows what's best." I felt my finger joints start to separate. "James, please." I looked at him, desperate. He was already trying to grab Mom's wrists. "Let her go." The ring was cutting deeper, blood starting to well up around the band, and I felt dizzy. I woke up in the hospital a few hours later, filled with pain and anger. My mom kept calling me. James was telling me he's sorry for embarrassing me and asking me if I was sure I still liked him. But all the noise around me simply came in one ear out the other. I answered the phone and told my mom to come to the hospital. It was time to make her pay. My left hand woke me up before anything else, throbbing like someone was squeezing my finger in a vice. I opened my eyes and the hospital ceiling came into focus. White tiles with those little dots that always make me dizzy when I stare too long. The bandage wrapped around my ring finger felt tight and wrong. A thick white reminder that last night actually happened. Mom had twisted my engagement ring until the metal cut through skin and the joints started to separate. Elena had held me down while it happened. James had tried to stop it. Those were facts, not nightmares. And the pain shooting up my arm every time I moved proved it. I shifted in the bed and felt something click into place in my brain, like a switch flipping. For 22 years, I'd been trying to figure out what was wrong with me, why I could never make Mom happy no matter how hard I tried. But lying there with my mangled finger, I finally understood. Nothing was wrong with me. Everything was wrong with her. James was slumped in the chair beside my bed, his suit jacket draped over the armrest and his tie loosened around his neck. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes and his hair sticking up where he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw me awake, he sat up straight and leaned forward. "Mia, I'm so sorry. I should have stopped her sooner. I should have seen it coming. I embarrassed you in front of your family and now everything's worse and I need to know if you still want to be with me after all this." The words came out in a rush and he looked so guilty, so convinced he'd failed me somehow. I felt irritation flash through me, hot and sharp, because he still didn't get it. He hadn't embarrassed me. He'd saved me. But mixed with the irritation was this soft, warm feeling. Because he was here, he'd stayed all night in an uncomfortable hospital chair, and he cared enough to worry about my feelings even after watching my mother try to break my finger off. "You didn't embarrass me," I said, my voice scratchy from sleep. "You tried to help." He started to respond, but my phone buzzed on the bedside table, loud and insistent. Then it buzzed again. And again. I reached for it with my good hand and saw 17 missed calls from Mom. 17. I unlocked the screen and pulled up the voicemails, my thumb hovering over the first one. James watched me, his expression worried, but I pressed play anyway. Mom's voice filled the small room, high and tearful. "Mia, sweetie, I don't know what happened last night. I think I had some kind of episode. Please call me back so we can talk about this. I love you so much and I'm so sorry if I hurt you." The message ended and I played the next one. This time her voice was harder, sharper. "Mia, you need to call me back right now. You're making this into something it's not. I was trying to help you see sense about that man and you overreacted. Call me." The third message was back to crying. "I failed as a mother. I failed you and Elena both. You hate me and I don't blame you. I'm the worst person alive." I listened to 3 more, watching the pattern repeat. Sobbing apologies, then accusations that I was destroying the family, then guilt trips about what a terrible mother she was, then threats about what would happen if I didn't call back. My therapist had warned me about this cycle years ago when I first started seeing her. The manipulation wheel, she'd called it. Go through every emotion until something sticks, and the victim comes back. I silenced my phone and set it face down on the table. A knock on the door interrupted the quiet. A woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a bun stepped into the room, carrying a tablet and wearing a hospital ID badge that read, "Heidi Langley, LCSW. Good morning, Mia. I'm one of the social workers here. I do routine intake assessments for patients who come through the ER with certain types of injuries. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Her voice was calm and professional, the kind of tone that probably put most people at ease. I nodded and she pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed from James. She glanced at him, a question in her eyes. "He can stay," I said. Heidi opened something on her tablet and looked at me with careful, neutral attention. "Can you tell me how your injury happened?" I took a breath and the whole story came out. Christmas dinner at Mom's house. Bringing James even though Mom had told me not to. Seeing Elena with bruises and a limp. Mom screaming when she saw my engagement ring. Her grabbing my hand and twisting the ring while Elena held me from behind, arms locked around my chest. The metal cutting deeper until I felt my finger joints start to separate. James trying to pull Mom's hands away. Blood and dizziness, and then waking up here. Heidi's expression changed while I talked. The professional calm stayed on the surface, but underneath I saw something sharper. More alert. When I got to the part about Elena holding me down, Heidi stopped typing notes and looked at me directly. "Your sister physically restrained you while your mother was injuring you?" "Yes." "And you said your sister had visible bruises and was limping when you arrived?" "Yes." "Her boyfriend Derek, he hits her. Mom thinks it's good that he does, that it means he cares." Heidi was quiet for a moment, her fingers still on the tablet screen. Then she said, "Mia, what happened to you last night was assault. You know that, right?" Something settled in my chest when she said it out loud. Assault. Not a family disagreement, not Mom having a bad day, not me overreacting. Assault. "I know," I said, "and I'm going to make her pay for it." The words surprised me as I said them, but I meant them completely. For the first time in my life, I felt clear about what I needed to do. I was going to document everything. I was going to press charges. I was going to stop protecting her from the consequences of her actions. It felt scary and liberating at the same time, like stepping off a cliff and realizing I could fly. Heidi nodded slowly. "I'm going to connect you with some resources. Victim advocacy services, legal aid if you need it, counseling specifically for family violence survivors. You don't have to make any decisions right now, but I want you to know what options exist." She spent 10 minutes going through different services, writing down phone numbers and website addresses on a piece of hospital letterhead. When she left, James moved his chair closer to the bed and took my good hand carefully. "Mia, I need to tell you something about the legal side of this." His voice was gentle but serious. "I can't represent you in court. I witnessed the assault, which means I'd be a witness in any case you bring. That creates a conflict of interest. I can't be both your lawyer and someone who has to testify about what happened." I felt my chest sink a little. Having James handle everything would have been easier, safer, but he kept talking. "What I can do is find you the best victims' rights attorney in the city. Someone who specializes in family violence cases and knows how to navigate the system. I'll support you through every step. I'll be there for every meeting and every court date. but someone else needs to be your lawyer. He squeezed my hand. I promise you'll have the best representation possible. Before I could respond, a nurse came in to check my vitals. She was young, maybe late 20s, with efficient movements and kind eyes. After she finished with the blood pressure cuff and temperature check, she pulled out a camera. I need to take some photos of your injury for the medical record, she explained. Is that okay? I nodded and unwrapped the bandage from my finger, trying not to look at what was underneath. The nurse positioned my hand under the overhead light and started taking pictures from different angles. Close-ups of where the ring had cut through skin, wider shots showing the swelling around the joint, photos of the bruising that had spread across my palm. I made myself watch the camera screen as she worked, forcing myself to see the damage clearly. The laceration was deep, a dark red line that circled my finger where the ring had twisted. The skin around it was purple and yellow and swollen to almost twice its normal size. Looking at the images made me feel exposed and vulnerable, like I was seeing myself from outside my own body. But I knew I needed this evidence. These photos would matter later, in court or police reports, or wherever this ended up going. The nurse finished and carefully rewrapped the bandage. You're going to need to see a hand specialist for follow-up, she said. The doctor will give you a referral before you're discharged. After she left, I picked up my phone and stared at Mom's contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button. James watched me but didn't say anything, letting me make my own choice. I took a breath and pressed call. Mom answered on the first ring. Mia! Oh, thank God, I've been so worried. Are you okay? Where are you? Her voice was thick with fake concern, dripping with that false sweetness that used to make me doubt myself. Not anymore. I'm at the hospital, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. If you want to talk, you can come here. Of course, I'll be right there. Which hospital? I'll bring you some things from home, some clean clothes, and... Just come to the hospital, Mom. We'll talk here. I gave her the name and room number, then ended the call before she could say anything else. James looked at me with concern and maybe a little confusion. You sure about this? I need witnesses, I said. If she comes here, there are nurses and security, and you. She can't twist this into something else if other people see what happens. He nodded slowly, understanding. Smart. We waited. I checked the time on my phone obsessively, watching the minutes tick by. James got me water from the pitcher on the bedside table and helped me sit up more comfortably in the bed. My hand kept throbbing, a constant reminder of why we were doing this. 2 hours later, I heard her voice in the hallway before I saw her. That particular tone she used when she wanted something from someone, bright and friendly and completely fake. Then she appeared in the doorway and I had to fight the urge to shrink back into the bed. She was dressed perfectly. Navy blue dress with a pearl necklace, hair styled, makeup flawless. She carried a huge bouquet of flowers, pink roses and white lilies, the kind of arrangement that probably cost $200. Her expression was worried mother, all soft eyes and trembling lips. The performance was so convincing that for a second I wondered if I'd imagined everything. If maybe I really had overreacted and this was all my fault. Then I looked at my bandaged finger and the doubt evaporated. Oh, Mia, Mom said, rushing to the bedside. She tried to set the flowers down and reach for me at the same time. I've been so worried. Let me see your hand. Are you in pain? What did the doctor say? She kept talking, a steady stream of concerned questions, but her eyes kept flicking to James. She wanted me alone. I could see it in how she positioned herself, angling her body to block him out. Maybe we should talk in the hallway, she suggested. Or the cafeteria. I'm sure you'd like to get out of this room for a bit. No, I said. We can talk here. But there's no privacy, sweetie. This is family business. We don't need... She glanced at James again, her expression cooling slightly. We don't need an audience. James stays, I said. And we talk here or we don't talk at all. Mom's smile tightened, but she sat down in the chair Heidi had used earlier. She set the flowers on the windowsill and folded her hands in her lap, the picture of a concerned parent. Okay, whatever makes you comfortable. Now, about last night, I think we both got a little carried away. Emotions were high and... You assaulted me, I said. The words came out calm and clear. You grabbed my hand and twisted my engagement ring until it cut through my skin and separated my finger joint. Elena held me down while you did it. That's assault, Mom. And I'm considering pressing charges. The mask cracked. Just for a second, I saw her real face underneath. Rage, pure and cold. Then she smoothed it back over and her voice went up, sharp and loud. That's not what happened. You're twisting everything. I was trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake and you got hysterical. You pulled away and hurt yourself. That's not true, James said quietly. Mom's head whipped toward him. You stay out of this. This is between me and my daughter. You've already done enough damage, filling her head with your feminist nonsense, turning her against her own family. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice, a security guard said from the doorway. I hadn't seen James signal anyone, but there he was, a hospital security officer in his blue uniform. Mom immediately switched tactics. The rage disappeared and tears filled her eyes. Please, I'm just trying to talk to my daughter. She's having some kind of breakdown and I'm trying to help her. She's not thinking clearly. She needs help. The security guard looked at me, then at my bandaged hand, then back at Mom. Ma'am, there's a report on file about an assault. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. A report? She filed a report against me? Her own mother? Mom stood up, her voice rising again. Mia, how could you do this? After everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I made. You need to leave now, the guard said, his tone firm but not aggressive. Mom stared at me for a long moment. I met her eyes and didn't look away, didn't apologize, didn't back down. Finally, she grabbed her purse and swept out of the room, the guard following behind her. I could hear her voice echoing down the hallway, telling anyone who would listen about her ungrateful daughter who was having a mental breakdown. James moved his chair closer and took my good hand again. Neither of us said anything for a while. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking slightly. But underneath the fear was something solid and steady. I'd done it. I'd confronted her with witnesses present. I'd called her behavior what it actually was. And I hadn't backed down. About 20 minutes after Mom left, a detective knocked on the doorframe. He was maybe 40, wearing a wrinkled suit and carrying a worn leather notebook. He introduced himself as Detective Keith Bailey and asked if I was up for giving a statement. I nodded and James moved his chair slightly to give us space, but stayed close enough to hear everything. Bailey pulled out a pen and started asking questions in this calm, methodical way that made me feel like he actually believed me. I walked him through the whole Christmas dinner, starting from when we arrived and Elena opened the door with those bruises. I described Mom's face when she saw James, the way it went red and tight. I told him exactly what she said before she grabbed my hand. Bailey wrote everything down, asking me to repeat certain phrases word for word. When I got to the part about Elena holding me from behind, my voice wobbled slightly, but I kept going. I described the pressure of Mom twisting the ring, the feeling of my skin tearing, the blood starting to well up. Bailey asked about James trying to intervene, and I confirmed he'd been trying to pull Mom's wrists away. The whole statement took maybe 40 minutes, and by the end my throat felt raw from talking. Bailey thanked me and said he'd be in touch, then handed me his card with his direct number written on the back. After he left, James helped me gather my things from the hospital room. My phone had been charging on the windowsill, and when I picked it up, I saw 3 missed calls from Mom and a text from Elena. I opened the text first. It read exactly like something Mom would write, but with Elena's name attached. You scared Mom so badly, she's been crying all day. Please just apologize and we can fix this. My stomach turned reading it. I could practically hear Mom standing over Elena's shoulder, dictating every word. The please just apologize part made me want to throw my phone across the room. I showed it to James without saying anything and he read it, his jaw tightening. He suggested I screenshot it and send it to Bailey, so I did that right away. Then I turned off my phone completely because I couldn't handle any more messages. That evening at my apartment, I opened my laptop and started a new document. I titled it, Childhood Training Documentation, and began typing everything I could remember. The encyclopedia balancing came first because that memory was so clear and sharp. I described standing in the living room at 8 years old, my arms shaking, water sloshing everywhere. I wrote about the bedtime phrase recitation, standing in front of the bathroom mirror with Elena, repeating those awful sentences until they were automatic. I documented the punishments for speaking out of turn, the way Mom would go silent and cold for days if I questioned anything. I wrote about her throwing my Northwestern acceptance letter down the garbage disposal. Every memory I typed made my chest feel tighter, but I kept going, adding detail after detail. By the time I stopped, the document was 8 pages long and it was past midnight. My injured finger throbbed from all the typing, but I felt like I'd accomplished something important. I saved 3 copies in different places and emailed one to myself. The next morning, James made breakfast while I called my therapist's office. The receptionist said they had an emergency slot available that afternoon if I could make it. I took it immediately, relieved to have somewhere to process everything that was happening. After I hung up, James mentioned he'd reached out to a colleague who specialized in family violence cases. His friend had recommended an attorney named Gordon Whitney, who apparently had a strong track record with protective orders and assault cases. James had already sent Whitney's office a brief summary of what happened, and they'd responded saying they could meet with me next week. Knowing I'd have actual legal representation made the constant anxiety in my chest ease up slightly. I wasn't doing this alone anymore. I had professionals who understood how these cases worked and could guide me through the process. Around noon, my phone started buzzing constantly with notifications. I'd turned it back on to check messages from work and immediately regretted it. Mom had posted something on Facebook about ungrateful children who break their mothers' hearts after everything they've sacrificed. She didn't name me directly, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. Within 2 hours, I had 17 messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, all asking what was going on or telling me I needed to apologize to my mother. A few were more aggressive, calling me selfish and cruel. I read 3 of them before my hands started shaking. Then I went into settings and turned off all social media notifications. I drafted a response in my head defending myself and explaining what really happened, but I stopped before typing anything. Anything I said publicly could be twisted or used against me later. Better to stay silent and let the legal process speak for itself. 2 days later, I drove to the courthouse downtown. My hand was still bandaged and it hurt to grip the steering wheel properly. Inside, the building was cold and institutional, with metal detectors and guards checking bags. I found the clerk's office and asked for the paperwork to file a temporary protective order. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, handed me a thick packet of forms and directed me to a table in the corner. I sat down and started filling them out, my hand shaking as I checked boxes describing the violence, physical assault, injury requiring medical treatment, fear of continued harm. There was a section asking for detailed description of the incident, and I wrote out the Christmas dinner assault as clearly as I could, including the hospital treatment and the photographs taken of my injury. The clerk reviewed everything when I brought it back up, made sure I'd signed in all the right places, then stamped it with an official seal. She scheduled a hearing for 10 days from now and explained that Mom would be served with the order, which meant a sheriff's deputy would deliver it to her house. That part made my stomach flip because I knew how Mom would react to being served legal papers. But I also knew I needed this boundary in place. I thanked the clerk and left with my copy of the filing, the official stamp making everything feel suddenly very real. Detective Bailey called me 3 days after that first interview. He needed a follow-up statement with more specific details about exact quotes and the precise sequence of events. I sat at my kitchen table with my notes from the hospital and walked him through it again. He asked me to recall Mom's exact words when she saw James. I told him she'd said, "Look what you've become," right before she started screaming about destroying everything she'd taught me. He asked about Elena's words while she was holding me, and I repeated, "I'm helping you, and Mom knows what's best," exactly as I remembered them. Bailey asked clarifying questions about the timeline, who grabbed who first, how long the whole incident lasted. I estimated maybe 2 or 3 minutes from when Mom grabbed my hand until James managed to get her to let go. Bailey wrote everything in his notebook in this careful, methodical way that made me feel like he was building a real case. Before he hung up, he mentioned he'd also be interviewing James separately to get his witness account. The next morning, I found a canvas bag sitting outside my apartment door. No knock, no note on the outside, just this bag leaning against the frame. I brought it inside and opened it carefully. Old family photos spilled out, dozens of them from throughout my childhood. There was a note on top in Elena's handwriting that said, "Don't do this, please, you're tearing us apart." I sat on my couch and started looking through the pictures. There was one of me at maybe 8 years old, standing very straight with a book balanced on my head, my face serious and concentrated. Another showed Elena and me in matching dresses at some holiday dinner, both of us smiling these tight, careful smiles. I found one from my high school graduation where Mom had her arm around me, but I was leaning slightly away, my body language showing discomfort even then. Looking at these photos made me feel this deep, aching grief for the childhood I'd lived through, but it also made me more determined. These pictures were evidence of the performance we'd all been maintaining, the careful facade that hid what was really happening. I put them back in the bag and stored it in my closet, not ready to throw them away, but not wanting to look at them anymore either. That afternoon, James came over looking troubled. He told me Mom had called him directly that morning, trying to work around me. She'd suggested they could work this out as adults without involving the courts, and had asked him to convince me to drop the protective order. James said he'd documented the entire call, noting the time and everything she'd said, then politely declined to discuss the case. He'd told her any communication needed to go through attorneys and hung up. Then he'd immediately called me to let me know what happened. I felt grateful for his loyalty and the way he handled it, not getting pulled into her manipulation. We talked about blocking her number on his phone, but decided to leave it open in case she said something else that could be useful for the case. Every contact she made, despite my clear boundaries, was more evidence of the pattern Bailey and Whitney needed to see. Going back to work was harder than I expected. My job involved a lot of computer work, and typing with my injured finger was painful and slow. I had to hunt and peck with my right hand, avoiding putting pressure on the bandaged finger. By the end of the first day back, my productivity was maybe half of normal, and I felt frustrated and embarrassed. I requested a meeting with my boss to ask for temporary accommodations, maybe some deadline extensions, or the ability to use voice-to-text software. She was understanding and approved everything I asked for without making me explain too much. But I could see the questions in her eyes, the curiosity about what had happened to my hand, and why I looked so exhausted. I hated that this private family nightmare was spilling into my professional life, that coworkers were probably gossiping about my injury, and wondering what was going on. I kept my head down and focused on getting through each day, counting down until the protective order hearing when at least some of this would be resolved. The following week, James drove me to Attorney Gordon Whitney's office in the downtown district. The building was old brick with narrow hallways that smelled like coffee and paper. Gordon's office was on the 3rd floor, crammed with file boxes stacked against every wall. He stood when we entered, a man in his 50s with gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He shook my hand carefully, noticing the bandage on my finger. We sat in chairs facing his desk while he pulled out a yellow legal pad and started taking notes. He explained that I had 2 separate paths forward. The criminal system meant working with Detective Bailey to pursue assault charges against Mom, which could result in fines or probation if the prosecutor decided to take the case. The civil system meant filing for a permanent protective order through family court, which would legally ban Mom from contacting me or coming near my home. Both paths required detailed documentation. He needed medical records, witness statements, photographs, and a written timeline of events. He asked if I had any prior documentation of Mom's behavior patterns. I mentioned the therapy records from years ago, but admitted I'd never formally reported anything before. Gordon nodded and said that was common in family abuse cases. He handed me a packet of forms to fill out and scheduled a follow-up meeting for 2 weeks later. The consultation lasted 90 minutes and cost $300. which James insisted on paying. We left the office, and I felt both relieved to have professional help and overwhelmed by how much work lay ahead. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started compiling the childhood conditioning phrases into a written statement. I opened a blank document and stared at the cursor for several minutes before I could type the first line. "Whatever you think is best, honey. I'm sorry for speaking out of turn." The phrases came back so easily, like they'd been burned into my brain. I described the encyclopedia balancing exercises, the water tray drills, standing against the wall for hours if we slouched. I wrote about the bedtime mirror recitations and how Elena and I would practice until our voices went flat and automatic. Reading my own words felt strange and distant, like I was looking at someone else's abusive childhood instead of my own. I had to stop after the first page because my hands were shaking and tears were dripping onto the keyboard. I got up and paced around the apartment, made tea, came back and wrote another paragraph. The document grew to 5 pages over 3 hours. I saved it and closed the laptop, feeling drained and raw. James called to check on me, and I told him I'd finished the statement. He said he was proud of me. I went to bed but couldn't sleep, my mind replaying all those training sessions and Mom's flat voice saying again, again, again. 2 days later, I had my weekly therapy session. My counselor listened to everything that had happened since Christmas, and then started giving me language for what I'd experienced. She said Mom's behavior patterns fit definitions of enmeshment, where a parent treats their child as an extension of themselves rather than a separate person. She explained coercive control, the systematic pattern of domination through isolation, monitoring, and degradation. She called the childhood training systematic conditioning, designed to break down my sense of self and replace it with reflexive obedience. Hearing these clinical terms made something click in my brain. It wasn't just bad parenting or strictness. It was calculated abuse with a specific goal. My counselor taught me a boundary script to use if Mom tried to contact me again. The script was simple. "I'm not discussing this with you. If you contact me again, I will document it and provide it to my attorney. This conversation is over." We practiced saying it out loud until the words felt natural in my mouth instead of terrifying. She reminded me that setting boundaries wasn't cruel. It was self-preservation. I left the session feeling more solid and clear-headed than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up to a text message from Derek. It was long and threatening, claiming I was spreading lies about Elena and destroying their relationship. He said if I didn't stop interfering, he'd take legal action against me for harassment and defamation. The message made my stomach clench, but I didn't panic. I opened my phone's screenshot function and captured the entire text thread, making sure Derek's number was visible at the top. Then I forwarded the screenshots to Detective Bailey with a brief message explaining who Derek was and his connection to Elena. Bailey responded within an hour, thanking me for the documentation and saying he'd add it to the case file. My hands stayed steady the whole time, which surprised me. I was learning to treat each threat as evidence rather than something to fear. I decided to try one more time to get Elena to speak on the record about what happened at Christmas. I called her cell phone and she answered on the 4th ring. Her voice sounded hollow and tired. I asked if she'd be willing to give a statement to Detective Bailey about Mom grabbing me and her holding me down. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she said I was making everything worse, that Mom was devastated and the family was falling apart because of me. I tried to explain that Mom had assaulted me and nearly broke my finger, that this wasn't about family drama, but actual violence. Elena's voice went flat. She said I'd always been dramatic and unable to accept discipline. She said Mom was just trying to help me see reason about James. Then she hung up. I sat holding my phone, feeling a deep ache in my chest. I realized I couldn't save Elena until she was ready to save herself. She was too deep in the conditioning, too committed to the belief that abuse was love. I had to let her go for now. 3 days later, I was making dinner in my apartment when the building intercom buzzed. The security guard's voice came through asking if I wanted to allow my mother up to my unit. My whole body went cold. I told him no, absolutely not, and asked him to call the police because there was a protective order being processed. The guard said he'd make the call and keep Mom in the lobby. I went to my window and looked down at the street entrance 4 floors below. I could see Mom standing on the sidewalk, her face tilted up toward the building. Even from this distance, I could see the rage twisting her features. 2 police officers arrived about 10 minutes later. I watched them talk to Mom, saw one officer writing in a notebook. They handed her some papers, probably a trespass warning. Mom gestured angrily and her voice carried up to my window, though I couldn't make out the words. Finally, she turned and walked away, her movements stiff and jerky. The officers waited until she was out of sight before getting back in their car. I called the security guard to thank him, and he said he'd make a note in the building log about the incident. I saved the date and time in my phone, adding it to my growing list of boundary violations. The next morning, I met with my professor to discuss my incomplete coursework. I'd submitted medical documentation from the hospital, along with a brief explanation that I was dealing with a family emergency and legal case. The professor reviewed the paperwork and granted me an incomplete for the semester, without asking too many questions. She said I could make up the work over the next 8 weeks and still receive credit for the class. It was a small, practical victory that gave me breathing room. I wouldn't have to choose between my legal case and failing out of school. I thanked her and left her office feeling like at least one part of my life was manageable. Detective Bailey called James that afternoon requesting a brief witness statement about what he observed during the Christmas assault. James met with Bailey at the police station and provided a neutral, factual account. He described arriving at the house, seeing Elena's injuries, Mom's reaction to the engagement ring, and then the assault itself. He stuck to observable facts without adding his opinions about Mom's character or our family dynamics. When James told me about the statement later, I felt grateful he understood how to navigate the legal system without complicating things. His professional background meant he knew exactly how much to say and what to leave out. Late that night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until 2 in the morning, then finally gave up and opened my phone. I scrolled through old voicemails Mom had left me over the years, messages I'd saved without really knowing why. I listened to them one by one. The pattern was so clear it made me feel sick. Every message followed the same cycle. First, the sobbing apology. "I'm so sorry, honey. I just love you so much. I never meant to hurt you." Then the accusation. "But you really shouldn't have done that. You know how it upsets me when you ignore my advice." Then the guilt trip. "I'm your mother. I'm the only one who will ever truly love you. Everyone else will leave, but I'll always be here." Then the threat. Subtle but unmistakable. "I just hope you realize what you're throwing away before it's too late." The cycle repeated endlessly across dozens of messages spanning years. Recognizing the pattern helped me stop blaming myself for never being good enough. The game was rigged from the start. There was no way to win because the rules kept changing to ensure I always failed. I met with Gordon again the following week. He'd reviewed all my documentation and had advice about narrowing the case focus. He said trying to address the entire childhood of abuse would be too complicated for court. Judges needed clear, provable incidents with specific dates and witnesses. He recommended focusing the civil case specifically on the Christmas ring assault. We had medical evidence, photographs, witness testimony from James, and a clear timeline. Trying to prove decades of psychological conditioning would muddy the waters and weaken the strong case we already had. I felt frustrated by the limitation. It seemed wrong that the court system couldn't address the real root of the problem, all those years of systematic control and manipulation. But Gordon explained that courts dealt with actions, not patterns of psychological harm. I understood his reasoning, even though it felt incomplete. We'd have to settle for holding Mom accountable for what we could prove in court, even if that was just the tip of the iceberg. The protective order hearing was scheduled for 10 days out, and sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios, then drag myself through the next day feeling like I was moving underwater. After the 3rd night of this, I started building routines to manage the anxiety. Every night before bed, I checked all the locks twice, testing each door handle and window latch. I varied my route home from campus, never taking the same path 2 days in a row. Whenever I arrived somewhere, anywhere, I texted James a quick message with my location. The rituals felt excessive at first, but they gave me something concrete to control when everything else felt chaotic. My phone buzzed one afternoon with a notification from my cousin Sarah. She'd forwarded me screenshots from a family group chat Mom had started. The messages made my stomach turn. Mom claimed I'd attacked her first at Christmas dinner, that she was only defending herself when I grabbed her arm and twisted it. She described herself as the victim of an ungrateful, violent daughter who was trying to destroy the family. Sarah's message was brief. "Thought you should see this. I'm sorry." I forwarded everything to Gordon immediately, my hands shaking as I typed the email. He responded within an hour saying this was perfect evidence of Mom's pattern of controlling the narrative and manipulating family members. "Add it to the file," he wrote. Hospital billing called me the next morning for what they described as a routine follow-up consultation. The woman on the phone asked detailed questions about my injury documentation and insurance coverage. She wanted to confirm they'd properly coded everything related to the assault, including the emergency room visit, the x-rays, and the follow-up appointments. The conversation dragged on for 20 minutes, covering administrative details that made my brain feel foggy. I forced myself to stay focused and take notes, writing down reference numbers and claim codes. When I finally hung up, I felt exhausted by the sheer tedium of managing all this paperwork on top of everything else. Gordon called me 3 days later with news that made my chest tighten. Mom had filed a cross-complaint through her attorney, claiming that I'd actually grabbed her arm first, and she was only protecting herself from my aggression. The document alleged that I was the instigator, and she was acting in self-defense. Gordon's voice stayed calm as he explained this was a standard abuse tactic, muddying the waters to make both parties look equally responsible. We spent an hour on the phone preparing our response. He walked me through how we'd cite James's witness statement describing exactly what happened, the medical photographs showing my injury with no corresponding injury to Mom, and the physical evidence of the ring cutting into my finger. "The facts are on our side," he kept saying. "Don't let this shake you." That evening, James and I sat on my couch having the conversation we'd been avoiding. He asked about our wedding timeline, whether we should start making announcements or setting a date. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to marry him, but the thought of Mom using our wedding as another weapon against me made me feel sick. We talked for over an hour, weighing options and considering timing. Finally, we agreed to delay any public announcements until after the legal case was resolved. We'd keep our engagement private, just between us, protecting it from becoming another thing Mom could twist or manipulate. The decision felt mature and careful, rather than disappointing. Detective Bailey left me a voicemail the following afternoon, requesting authorization to access my medical records from the hospital. He explained that the injury documentation would become part of the criminal investigation, and he needed my written consent to obtain the files. I met him at the police station the next morning and signed the release form, my signature looking shaky on the official paper. Watching him add the form to a growing file folder made everything feel more real and irreversible. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a criminal case with evidence and documentation and official procedures. I texted Elena a week later asking if she wanted to meet for coffee. She agreed immediately, suggesting a neutral coffee shop halfway between our apartments. I arrived early and chose a table near the window, ordering a drink I barely touched. Elena showed up 10 minutes late, walking carefully like her ribs hurt. We made awkward small talk about nothing important, dancing around the real topics. Then I saw Derek's car pull into the parking lot. He didn't come inside, just parked where he had a clear view through the window and sat there watching us. My chest tightened with fear. Elena noticed me staring and glanced over her shoulder, then looked back at her coffee cup without reacting. I lasted 10 minutes before I couldn't take it anymore. I made an excuse about remembering an appointment and left, my hands trembling as I walked to my car. As soon as I was safely away, I pulled over and texted Detective Bailey about what happened, describing Derek's car and his intimidation behavior. Bailey responded the next day saying he'd filed an official report about the incident. He explained that Derek's behavior fit a pattern of family harassment and intimidation, and having it documented created a paper trail. Reading his message made me feel less crazy, like I had proof that these things were actually happening and not just in my head. Each incident went into the file, building a case that showed this wasn't isolated drama, but systematic abuse. My therapist gave me homework during our next session. She wanted me to draft a boundary letter to Mom explaining what contact I would and won't accept going forward. The assignment felt impossible. I worked on it for days, writing and deleting and rewriting. I tried to be clear and firm without being cruel, setting specific limits about phone calls and messages and family events. Part of me kept questioning why I was still trying to be kind to someone who'd hurt me so badly. But another part of me needed to prove I wasn't the monster Mom claimed I was, that I could set boundaries without being vindictive. The nightmare hit me at 3 a.m, jolting me awake with my heart racing. I was 6 years old again, balancing that encyclopedia on my head while carrying the water tray. My legs were shaking with exhaustion, and Mom's voice kept saying again, again, again. I lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling and forcing myself to reframe the memory. That wasn't etiquette training. That was control training, teaching me that my body didn't belong to me, that my limits didn't matter, that obedience was more important than pain. Grief washed over me for the childhood I deserved but never got, for the mother who should have protected me instead of breaking me down. I cried quietly until dawn started filtering through the curtains, mourning something I'd never actually had. The hearing date arrived 3 weeks later. I sat in the courthouse hallway on a hard wooden bench, watching Mom through the glass doors of the waiting area. She looked perfect. Hair done, makeup subtle but polished, wearing a navy dress that said respectable mother. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, even though I could see from where I sat that her face was completely dry. Every few minutes she'd glance toward the hallway, checking if anyone was watching her performance. I pulled out my folder of testimony notes and forced myself to breathe slowly, reading through the timeline I'd memorized. The medical photos were in there too. Pictures of my finger swollen and cut where the ring had twisted into the skin. James sat beside me, quiet and steady, not trying to fill the silence with reassurance I didn't need. When the bailiff called us in, my legs felt shaky, but I stood up and walked through those doors. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just the judge's bench and a few rows of seats. Mom's lawyer was already there, a woman in a gray suit who looked annoyed to be handling this case. The judge was an older man with reading glasses, and he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He started reviewing the file immediately, flipping through pages while we all sat in silence. I watched him study the medical photographs, his expression neutral but focused. He read James's witness statement, then the police report from Detective Bailey. Mom's lawyer stood up and started talking about how this was a family misunderstanding, how emotions ran high during the holidays, how her client deeply regretted the incident but felt my response was disproportionate. The judge let her finish, then looked directly at Mom and asked if she disputed the facts of what happened. Mom's voice was soft and wounded when she said no. She didn't dispute that there was an altercation, but she felt I was exaggerating the severity. The judge picked up the medical photos again and held them where Mom could see. He asked if she disputed that these injuries required hospital treatment. Mom's lawyer objected, saying the question was inflammatory, but the judge overruled her. Mom had to say no, she didn't dispute the hospital visit. The judge granted a short-term protective order right there, effective immediately, pending a full hearing in 6 weeks. Mom's lawyer objected hard, arguing that the order was unnecessary and would cause undue hardship, but the judge cut her off. He said the medical evidence and witness statement were sufficient to establish a credible threat, and the no-contact order was now legally enforced. I felt relief wash through my chest, cautious and careful, like I didn't want to trust it yet. Mom stood up fast, her chair scraping loud against the floor, and her lawyer had to grab her arm to stop her from saying something. We filed out through different doors, and I didn't look back. The family texts started that afternoon, but they were careful now. Nothing directly threatening. Just sad messages about how Mom was devastated, how I was tearing the family apart, how everyone was praying I'd come to my senses. I muted the group chat and felt nothing. For 2 days, it was quiet. Then my professor sent me an email asking me to come to her office to discuss my final paper. My stomach dropped when I read it. The email was formal and careful, saying there had been a concern raised about the originality of my work, and she needed to meet with me as soon as possible. I knew immediately what had happened. Mom had called the university. I gathered every draft of that paper, every research note, every highlighted source, and put it all in a folder. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. I barely slept that night, running through explanations in my head, feeling exhausted rage at how far Mom would go. When I walked into the professor's office, she looked uncomfortable. She explained that she'd received a call from someone claiming to be my mother, alleging that I had plagiarized significant portions of my final paper. She said she was required to investigate any plagiarism complaint, no matter the source. I spread out my materials on her desk, showing her the progression from initial notes to rough draft to final version. She reviewed everything carefully, comparing my drafts to the final submission, checking my citations against the source material. After 20 minutes, she looked up and apologized for having to ask. She said the complaint was clearly unfounded, and she'd document that in her records. I left her office feeling validated, but completely drained, like I'd just defended myself against an accusation I should never have faced. That evening, James came over with takeout, and we sat on my couch eating quietly for a while. Then he said something that surprised me. He admitted he was worried about how this case might affect his professional reputation if it became public. His voice was careful, like he was afraid I'd be angry, but I appreciated him being honest. We talked for over an hour about managing privacy versus transparency, about what we'd share publicly and what stayed between us. I told him I understood his concerns and didn't expect him to broadcast our personal life to protect me. He said he wanted to support me fully, but needed to be smart about how visible he made himself in the case. We agreed on clear boundaries, writing them down so we both knew exactly what was okay to discuss and what wasn't. I felt grateful he was willing to be vulnerable about his worries instead of pretending everything was fine. The next day, I spent money I didn't really have upgrading my apartment security. New deadbolts on both doors, the kind that need a key from both sides. A camera doorbell that sent alerts to my phone whenever someone approached. I tested it 3 times to make sure it worked, watching myself on the little screen. The locksmith finished around dinner time and I paid him in cash, trying not to think about how this was eating into my grocery budget. But that night, I slept better than I had in weeks. My body finally relaxed slightly, knowing I'd hear an alert if anyone came to my door. I woke up once around 3 in the morning and actually fell back asleep within minutes instead of lying there anxious until dawn. 2 days later, Mom left a voicemail. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me play it. Her voice was different this time, soft and sad and hinting at things without saying them directly. She talked about how hard this was for her, how she didn't know if she could keep going, how everything she'd built was falling apart. She never said the actual words, but the implication was clear. She was threatening to hurt herself because of what I was putting her through. I felt guilt try to grab hold of me, that old familiar pull to fix things and make her okay. But I'd learned enough in therapy to recognize the manipulation. I called the police non-emergency line and requested a welfare check at her address. The dispatcher asked if I thought she was in immediate danger, and I said I'd received a concerning voicemail from a family member hinting at self-harm. They said they'd send someone. I hung up and sat on my couch, refusing to call Mom directly, refusing to be pulled back into her cycle. The guilt gnawed at me anyway. Detective Bailey called me the next afternoon. The welfare check had found Mom perfectly safe and furious about the police showing up at her house. She'd apparently screamed at the officers about harassment and humiliation, demanding to know who had called them. Bailey said he'd added the manipulative voicemail to the case file, noting the pattern of behavior. He told me I'd handled it correctly by calling for the check instead of responding directly. I felt a detached steadiness when we hung up, knowing I'd done the right thing even though it felt awful. Gordon scheduled a prep session for the full protective order hearing the following week. I showed up at his office with all my documentation, and we spent 3 hours going through everything. He had me organize the medical photos in chronological order, labeling each one with dates and descriptions. We went through the witness statements, highlighting the key facts. He walked me through my testimony, asking questions and helping me practice staying calm and factual. We made a timeline poster board showing the pattern of escalation, from childhood conditioning to the ring assault. The methodical work helped me feel focused and determined rather than afraid. By the time I left his office, I had a clear plan for what I'd say in court. Elena showed up at my door just after midnight on a Tuesday. I heard the camera doorbell alert and checked my phone to see her standing there, swaying slightly like her ribs hurt. I opened the door and she practically fell inside. Fresh bruises covered her arms, poorly hidden under a cardigan. Her makeup was smeared and I could see the edge of a black eye under the concealer. I didn't ask questions, just helped her to the couch, got her a blanket, and left water and painkillers on the coffee table. She curled up and closed her eyes immediately. I went back to my bedroom but couldn't sleep, lying there in the dark wondering if this was finally the moment she'd leave Derek, wondering if I should push her to talk or just let her rest, wondering how many more times she'd have to get hurt before something changed. I woke up around 7 and heard movement in the living room. I stayed in bed for a few minutes, listening to Elena shuffle around, then got up and walked quietly to my bedroom door. Through the crack, I could see her sitting on the couch with her phone, her face lit up by the screen. Text after text came through, the phone buzzing constantly in her hands. I caught glimpses over her shoulder when I moved closer. The messages were all from Derek. Some were apologies, saying he was sorry and it would never happen again. Others were threats, saying she was making him look bad and she better come home. Then promises to change, saying he'd go to counseling and be better. Elena's thumbs moved across the screen, typing responses I couldn't read. She grabbed her jacket and shoes, moving quickly like she was trying to leave before I woke up. I heard the front door close softly. When I came out 10 minutes later, I found a note on the coffee table written on the back of a receipt. It said thanks for letting her crash and that she needed to go home. My chest felt tight reading those words, knowing she was walking right back into the same situation. I called Gordon's office that afternoon and asked if there was any way to try talking to Mom through a neutral person, maybe a therapist who could keep things calm. He said he'd look into it and called me back 2 hours later. He'd found a therapist named Rhoda Price who did this kind of mediation work. We sent a formal letter through Mom's lawyer asking if she'd agree to meet with the therapist present. Gordon said not to get my hopes up, but I wanted to try one last time before the full hearing. 3 days later, Gordon called to say Mom had rejected the offer completely. That same afternoon, I left my psychology class and walked toward the campus parking lot. Mom appeared from behind a row of cars, walking straight toward me with her purse clutched tight. I froze in the middle of the sidewalk. She started saying my name, her voice getting louder. 2 campus security officers came running from the main building. They stepped between us, one of them holding up his hand toward Mom. He told her she needed to leave immediately because there was a protective order. Mom's face went red and she started arguing, saying she just wanted to talk to her daughter. The other officer took her arm gently and walked her toward the visitor parking area. I stood there in the hallway outside the building, my legs shaking, watching them escort her to her car. Students walked past me staring, but I couldn't move. Gordon scheduled another prep session for the following week. We sat in his office and he told me to cut my testimony way down. He said I should focus just on what happened at Christmas dinner, the specific assault with the ring. I tried to explain that the judge needed to understand the whole pattern, all the years of training and control. Gordon shook his head and said, "Courts want facts and timelines, not context." I practiced saying just the basic details. Mom grabbed my hand. She twisted the ring. Elena held me. James tried to stop her. It felt like I was erasing the truth, leaving out everything that mattered, but I kept practicing until I could say it without crying. James came over that weekend and sat at my kitchen table with his laptop. He typed up a simple statement describing what he saw at the dinner. He wrote that Mom grabbed my hand and twisted my ring while Elena restrained me. He wrote that he attempted to intervene. He didn't add any opinions about Mom's behavior or character. The whole thing was maybe 2 paragraphs, clean and professional. I read it over his shoulder and felt grateful he knew how to do this without making it worse. My phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. It was Elena. Her voice was shaking, so bad I could barely understand her. She asked if I knew any resources for people in bad relationships. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the domestic violence hotline website. I read her the number slowly, making sure she wrote it down. Then I texted her the address and phone number for a local shelter program. I kept my voice steady and calm, telling her they could help her figure out what to do next. I didn't push or ask questions. I just gave her the information and told her I loved her. She hung up after a minute. 2 days later, Detective Bailey called to tell me Elena had filed a police report against Derek. She'd gone to the police station with an advocate from the shelter program. Derek had been detained and was being held pending investigation. I sat down on my couch and felt something like hope, fragile and careful, knowing Elena was finally choosing herself. But I also knew this was just the beginning and the road ahead would be brutal for her. The full hearing happened on a Thursday morning in early March. The courtroom was packed with people waiting for other cases. I sat next to Gordon at a table facing the judge's bench. Mom sat across the aisle with her lawyer, her face perfectly composed. When my turn came, I walked to the witness stand and put my hand on the Bible. I said my name and swore to tell the truth. Gordon asked me to describe what happened on Christmas Day. I told the story exactly like we practiced. Mom grabbed my left hand. She twisted my engagement ring. My sister Elena held me from behind. My finger joint separated and the ring cut into my skin. James tried to pull Mom's wrists away. I stayed calm and factual, no emotion in my voice. Mom's lawyer stood up and started asking questions, suggesting I was making this up because I was mad at my mother. He said I was being vindictive and trying to destroy my family. The judge held up his hand and told the lawyer to sit down. He looked through the medical photos, the ones showing my finger swollen and cut. He read James's witness statement. He reviewed the documentation of all Mom's calls and texts and the campus incident. Then he granted a 1-year protective order without any hesitation in his voice. As part of the order, the judge told Mom she had to complete a domestic violence intervention program. He gave her some fines to pay and mandatory counseling sessions to attend. The penalties seemed small, just some money and classes. But I felt something like satisfaction knowing she was being held accountable at all, even in this limited way. The judge's voice was firm when he told her she had to stay away from me. Elena called me a week later from a new number. She said she'd entered a 6-month shelter program that gave her a place to live and counseling sessions. She told me she needed to focus on her own recovery and could only have limited contact with me, supervised by her counselor. I told her I understood and respected whatever she needed. I felt cautiously optimistic that maybe we could rebuild something healthier eventually, once she had time to heal. I went back to campus 3 weeks after the hearing to finish my incomplete coursework. The disability office set up accommodations that let me record lectures instead of taking notes by hand. My professor gave me extra time on assignments and didn't ask questions when I showed up wearing a finger brace. I started hand therapy twice a week at a clinic near my apartment. The therapist had me squeeze rubber balls and stretch my fingers against resistance bands. The exercises hurt, but I did them anyway. My ring finger doesn't bend all the way anymore and probably never will. The scar runs in a thin white line where the metal cut deep into my skin. Some days I catch myself staring at it and feeling ugly. But most days I look at it and think about how I survived something that could have broken me completely. The scar is proof that I fought back and won. James and I sat on my couch one evening after I finished a therapy session. He asked if I still wanted to get married in the spring like we'd planned before everything happened. I told him I did want to marry him, but I needed time to focus on finishing school and feeling safe again. He nodded and said we could push the wedding back a year or even 2 if that's what I needed. The conversation felt calm and mature instead of disappointing. I appreciated that he was letting me set the pace instead of pushing for what he wanted. We decided to keep the engagement private and not make any big announcements until I was ready. A letter arrived from Mom's attorney 2 days later requesting that we both sign mutual non-disparagement agreements. The letter said Mom would agree not to talk about what happened if I agreed to do the same. Gordon called me after he reviewed it and said the request was too broad and one-sided. He sent back a counteroffer saying I wouldn't discuss the case publicly, but I reserved the right to talk about my experiences in therapy and with close friends. Mom's attorney agreed to the narrower terms. I felt satisfied with the compromise even though part of me wanted to tell everyone exactly what she did. I scheduled a session with Radha Price to draft my final boundary letter to Mom. Radha helped me write it in clear, firm language that didn't sound cruel or angry. The letter said I was open to supervised contact in the future if Mom completed her court-ordered program and respected my boundaries. I listed specific rules like no unannounced visits, no calls after 9 p.m., and no guilt trips about family obligations. Sending the letter felt like closing one chapter of my life before starting another. I didn't expect Mom to follow the rules, but at least I'd stated them clearly. Elena texted me asking if we could meet somewhere neutral with a counselor present. We chose a park near the shelter where she was staying. A DV advocate sat on a bench nearby while Elena and I walked the path around a small pond. We didn't talk about Mom or Derek or anything heavy. She told me about applying for jobs at local businesses, and I told her about my classes for next semester. The conversation felt careful and fragile, like we were learning how to be sisters again from scratch. I didn't push her to talk about the hard stuff. Just being in the same space without fighting felt like progress. My regular therapist and I spent a whole session talking about grief. I cried about the mother I needed but never had. The mother who would have celebrated my Northwestern acceptance instead of destroying it. The mother who would have protected me instead of training me to accept abuse. My counselor helped me understand that grieving that loss didn't mean I had to pursue reconciliation with the mother I actually got. I gave myself permission to choose my own well-being over family expectations. The release felt bigger than I expected. One Saturday morning, I went to a garden center and bought containers and soil and flower seeds. James had mentioned once that he loved sunflowers and lavender. I set up the containers on my balcony and planted the seeds, carefully following the instructions on the packets. The simple act of putting my hands in dirt and nurturing something beautiful felt like reclaiming control over my environment. I watered the containers every morning and watched for the first green shoots to appear. Building the life I wanted felt possible when I focused on small concrete actions. Gordon forwarded me an email notification that Mom had enrolled in the court-ordered counseling program. The notification said she'd completed 2 sessions so far. I read the email and filed it away without responding. The information was good to have, but I didn't feel any need to reach out or acknowledge her progress. Maintaining the protective distance felt more important than giving her praise for doing the bare minimum the court required. I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing an update for my own records. My engagement ring had been resized to fit my healing finger, and I could wear it comfortably now. The scar was visible but fading slowly. I was sleeping through most nights without nightmares. The problems weren't vanished, just managed, and I was learning that safety and peace came from consistent boundaries, rather than perfect resolutions. James and I were planning a small private ceremony for next spring, with just his sisters and a few close friends. Elena was 6 weeks into her shelter program and doing hard work in therapy. Mom was a distant figure who no longer controlled my choices or dictated my future. Life wasn't perfect or healed, but it was mine, and that felt like enough. That's it for now. Thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. I hope this left you feeling just a little brighter. Subscribe if you'd like more of that.